could it cause one? What is the Big One earthquake really, and what could it look like in reality? And why does this seafloor discovery carry the name of a mysterious ancient priestess that was said to be able to commune with the gods and tell the future? Join me as we unravel all this and much more and enter the Codex Legendarium. I'm Shelby Melanson. First off, hello, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today. A quick note, since we're going live again, I'm going to be going through the live chat towards the end of our discussion today and go through questions. So tell me all about what you think of today's topic. If you have questions, thoughts, everything, send it my way and we'll talk. So let's get right into it. There's a hole in the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and if you're anything like me, when you read something like that, the first thing that probably came to mind was, well, that can't be good. And you'd be right. The Pacific Ocean is our planet's largest and covers over 30% of Earth's surface. And this leak has been quietly bubbling away for at least the past decade, roughly 50 miles off the coast of Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. So, it's called Pythia's Oasis. And quite the name, right? Yeah, Pythia as in the Oracle of Delphi from ancient Greece, but a whole lot more on that later, so stay with me. Back in 2015, a team of researchers from the University of Washington spotted something unusual aboard a cruise ship. The ship's sonar had essentially picked up unusual plumes of bubbles as they rose to the surface of the ocean. And as it turned out, there were a lot more going on than what they expected to find from those bubbles. So after a while, thanks to some help from underwater robots and other types of observation tools, they discovered the water was actually shooting out of a hole on the seafloor, described as shooting into the ocean like a fire hose. Think about that for a second. A massive amount of water shooting straight out of a hole in the bottom of the ocean. Yeah. Later research from the same team was basically published in a paper in 2023 that summed up everything that they learned so far. And what they found was that the water getting spit out was a chemically distinct fluid, that's a quote, from the rest of the surrounding ocean water. So for one thing, it was almost purely fresh water as compared to the briny salt water of the surrounding ocean. Super weird. Now, there's actually a video of the hole itself, so I'm going to just take a second to the link to an article in the live chat so that you can take a look yourself. Let me send that now. All right, so take a look at the video, pull it up in a second window. It's pretty crazy to look at. You are getting a very up close and personal view of the footage from these, underwater observation tools, watching this in action. So crazy, right? But that said, let's back up a second. We're calling this a leak, right? So how is water coming out instead of draining in? And what does any of that have to do with tectonic plates, the whole shebang? The giant sheets of Earth's outer crust, the lithosphere, they basically fly around on Earth's mantle underneath, and they play into all of this. So let me explain. This particular leak, and obviously based on what we just mentioned, it doesn't flow in the direction you would expect it to. And again, if you're like me, maybe you visualize something like the drain in your kitchen sink as the water spins and, creates that small vortex as it drains in. Or maybe a storm drain, you get the idea. But that just on the ocean floor. But the thing is, that's not quite how this one works. Instead, the leak is actually flowing in reverse, and it has everything to do with what lies underneath the Earth's surface there. So Pythia's Oasis is located directly on a fault line called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. Now, something important with this, a fault line is essentially a fracture in the Earth's crust, meaning a crack in the Earth's crust, right? These can also be similar, or kind of the same idea of tectonic plate boundaries, areas where Earth's tectonic plates meet and interact with each other. Keep that in mind. You'll see why this is all important in a second. Just bear with me. So again, Pythia's Oasis. It's actually a liquid from a kind of underground spring. Like we talked about before, they found it to be chemically significant and chemically different than the water surrounding it. What is that? Well, it's because it's literally coming out of an underground spring. We're talking something, beneath the standard surface of the Earth. So in this case, from underneath the bottom of the ocean. Think about that, underneath the bottom of the ocean. Wild, right? Most of the time when we see bubbles coming up from the seafloor, it's because of things like hydrothermal vents. Those vents happen when water falls through a tectonic plate boundary, like we talked about, gets superheated, and then basically spit right back out. But this is different. Pythia's oasis is a lot more like an underground spring that just so happened to have sprung a leak. It's the first discovered of its kind ever, though, admittedly, scientists do believe that there could be a lot more of them nearby, especially since the fault line that it sits on is over 600 miles long, right? But here's the thing. This could also spell... Here's why. The water seeping out of this spring actually acts as a kind of lubricant for the two tectonic plates there. So imagine this, right? Here are the two plates, they meet, and the water underneath, it's basically exactly beneath where these two interact, right? So it acts as a lubricant, and it keeps the pressure high underneath this area of the Earth's crust. So losing too much of that basically means the friction between the tectonic plates will skyrocket. And as for why that matters, one of the authors on the 2023 paper we talked about a second ago described it like this. Let me just read you this quote directly. Quote, "The megathrust fault line is like an air hockey table." And it continues. "If the fluid pressure is high, it's like the air is turned on, meaning there's less friction and the two plates can slip. If the fluid pressure is lower, the two plates will lock. That's when stress can build up." So essentially, when tectonic plates get starting to move, things get shaken up. And I mean that very literally, as in by way of earthquakes. And some scientists think that the ocean could actually, this leak in the ocean that is, could actually fuel something called the big one. In other words, a potentially catastrophic 9.0 or higher magnitude earthquake. Yeah. And if this hit, it would be the strongest quake the US has basically ever seen in hundreds of years. Here's the thing. There are a couple of regions where science believes the big one might strike. And this is not a new concept. We'll talk about that in a second. Fears about this have been around for a while, mostly going back to 2015. But the main places, and there are a handful of them, that this centers around are, for instance, California and the Philippines, each with their own distinct and very powerful fault lines. But at the very top of the risk list, if you will, is our very own Cascadia Subduction Zone that we've been talking about off the coast of Oregon. So the concern is far from unfounded here. If you go back about 325 years, on January 26th in the year 1700, this exact same area produced an estimated 8.7 to 9.2 magnitude quake, one of the most devastating in history. Quakes in this class are so big that they're called megathrust events. And this one caused a tsunami so big that it not only hit the coast of the Pacific Northwest, but records suggest it also hit Japan, as in it traveled the entire length of the Pacific Ocean, upwards of 4,000 miles. Records show that during this event, it completely destroyed a village on Vancouver Island, and it left no survivors. Now keep in mind, this is the year 1700. Population is not quite what it is today as we understand it. But that begs the question, were this to happen today, what would it look like? More on that in a second. Back to this year 1700 event, right? It is also believed to be the cause of what are called ghost forests in Oregon and Washington state. When I learned about this, I'm a resident plant lover, okay? So this was crazy to me. But these ghost forests, aptly learn in a second, they're a massive onslaught of seawater. This is how they're caused, right? It's a massive onslaught of seawater by a tsunami that rushes over these forests that have otherwise never been exposed to this kind of salinity, this kind of salt water, and it wipes out every tree in the path, right? So what's left behind are essentially just dead tree stumps. And as it relates to this storm, this tsunami, 300 years ago, they're still there. These tree stumps that were killed by this event are still there, right? Earthquakes are no joke, is essentially the point here. Magnitude 8 or higher can effectively wipe out communities at the epicenter of the quake itself, and if a magnitude 9 or higher quake were to strike less than 100 miles off the coast of Oregon, you can imagine the devastation. Like we said a second ago, 300 years ago, population is not quite the same as it is today. So think about that number multiplied many times over, given how many people now live in the area. I'm not sure Vancouver would be considered a village these days. Fears about this basically went mainstream. They kind of erupted back in 2015 thanks to a particular article that got published in The New Yorker. So it described this particular quake that hit the Northwest, and let me again read you this quote. So the area of impact will cover some 140,000 square miles, including Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, Eugene, Salem, the capital city of Oregon, Olympia, the capital of Washington, some 7 million people, okay? And, the quote continues, it could cause the worst natural disaster in the history of North America, outside of the 2010 Haiti earthquake, which killed upward of 100,000 people. So think about this level of desolation and destruction that we're talking about here, right? This would be a very, very, very severe event were it to hit any one of those metropolis, let alone all of them together, right? Not to mention the resulting tsunami aftermath, okay? So that's a lot of doom and gloom. How likely are we to see something like this happen, right? Well, estimates say that the chance of a magnitude 7 quake in the next 50 years, and a side note on this, magnitude 7, not magnitude 9. The chance of a magnitude 7 quake in the next 50 years are anywhere from 10% to around 37%. I know, it's a big number. Whereas the chance of the big one quake, being what we talked about, magnitude 8.7 to 9.2, sits around 16 to 22%. So lower, but still rather high. That said, again, we're not all about doom and gloom here. So not long after this kind of discussion started getting a lot of traction, like after that 2015 article, the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network actually came out and kind of decided to chime in on what they believed was their take and why Pythia's Oasis suddenly started making the headlines. And the point they made was basically this. There isn't that much evidence to suggest that this leak in the ocean, although really interesting and very bizarre and one of a kind, there's no evidence to suggest it's really changing currently. In other words, we've known about it for a while and it's stayed relatively consistent. And they say that because of it, they write, here's another quote for you, quote, discovery is scientifically interesting, but does not change anything about our understanding of the earthquake or tsunami hazard from the Cascadia Subduction Zone. Okay? In other words, the risk is there, but it's no worse than it was before we made this discovery. Ultimately, this is just my personal take here. This is part of what comes with existing as residents of this incredible planet that we call home. Frankly, there isn't that much we can do about the natural movement of Earth's crust. Natural forces are both awe-inspiring and dangerous, and they are greater than us, meaning they are more powerful, more capable than we are, no matter how much we try to innovate above those threats or tell us that we are greater than the forces of nature. We are not. So, what can we take away from this? In this case, maybe the lesson here is just the more balanced approach. You know, be aware, be cautious, but don't allow the fears that we may have, especially ones that we have no actual control over, to rule us either, right? So, okay, before we jump into the live chat, I am super excited to hear what you guys have to say about this. I just want to round out the discussion. This would not be an episode of Codex without some arts and culture, right? And this is the perfect example. I want to go back and talk a little bit about the name. We alluded to this at the beginning, but the name of this leak is called Pythia's Oasis. So this is named after the Pythia at Delphi, meaning in ancient Greece, the Pythia was a really prestigious title of honor given to a high priestess, specifically of the temple of Apollo. But she was more than just a high priestess. There is a whole legacy and mythology surrounding the existence of these figures, which, again, Pythia is a title, not necessarily a specific person. It could be, you know, multiple specific people over a period of time. But I digress. The Pythia was an oracle. That's what makes her so significant. In other words, someone who could commune with God, the god Apollo, and see the future. So why would a scientific discovery about a hole in the ocean be named after this oracle, right? Science through the ages has tried to explain this oracle's visions. Maybe we should say explain away the oracle's visions. And one theory suggests that her psychic visions were actually caused by breathing in mind-altering gases. I know, sounds a little out there, stay with me. Those gases, according to the scientists anyway, may have been rising up from a low-salt, high-temperature underground spring, meaning a, heated underground spring of water with gases in it, right? The gases that will rise up from this point, that has a very, very low salt point. So the opposite of ocean water, right? Starting to sound a little familiar? All of this was located, according to them, above a seismic fault line, or a crack in the Earth's crust. And the temple of Delphi, where Pythia lived and gave her prophecies, had been built directly on top of this fault line where this could have been rising up from. So, sounds awfully similar to our ocean leak now, doesn't it? Anyway, that's where the discovery gets its name, though whether or not the oracle's powers came from the gases or not, maybe something else, that one is up for you to decide. So let me know what you think. Okay, that's it. We said we would read some live chat comments, so let's do that. For those who are just joining, thank you so much for being here. I'm thrilled to hear about what you want to talk about today. So let me pull that up right now. Here we go. Oh, from the truth will be revealed. That's a great username, by the way. Thank you so much for commenting. The truth will be revealed says, I've been watching for this earthquake since 2012 near Yellowstone, but there are also speculations of one on the East Coast. Yeah, so we briefly mentioned it a little bit earlier. There are a number of places that this, the big one earthquake and this kind of mass tsunami activity is, in a sense, predicted to possibly occur in the future, right? Most of it has to do with fault lines that kind of fall under specific criteria. Again, we talked about California and the Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Northwest is actually at the top of the list for this, but it's not limited to just that. Let's see. Welcome, Requiem. Good to see you. Comment from Cole Pierce. It's a fun thought. I was in a 7.1 earthquake. Wow, really? Fun. It definitely shakes the foundation. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm an East Coaster, so my personal lived experience with earthquakes is a little bit limited. But I want to say about 2 years ago, where I live in New York State, actually did get one. And where I was at the time, I was sitting just on the couch at home, and I felt the shake, right? It was the most bizarre thing. I had never really experienced anything like that. My first inclination, of course, was to pick up my phone and text my friend who was born in California to find out, like, was this an earthquake just now? Like, is that what this was? And turns out it was. Obviously, that's a very low end, and I don't in any way mean to minimize the intensity of these events. So yeah, I could imagine a 7.1 would be quite scary and quite disastrous in the property sense and the safety sense. So yeah, I can imagine. Another comment from the truth will be revealed. Seriously, great username. We need to get the type of cement that doesn't degrade like they had in Rome, which can repair itself. That would be a good start for a foundation. Okay, this is a great point. I'm so glad you bring this up. I can't speak to how this would stand up against an earthquake. My expertise doesn't quite go that deep into ancient Roman building materials. However, this is a really great example of cases where ancient wisdom and ancient creations actually did perform incredibly well, even when put through modern scientific rigorous testing. Besides this, my personal favorite example of this was actually some years ago, there was a scientific breakthrough discovery where a group of researchers actually finally chemically uncovered the secret to the Great Wall of China. What it was that as part of the mortar used to cement the bricks, they used rice water, and the glutinous chemical composition of the rice water is in large part why the Great Wall of China was able to survive so long, right, and through so much turmoil over the millennia. So yeah, super, super interesting to think about. Maybe this is, again, something that we talk about quite a lot on this channel. You know, I'm a big proponent of taking what can be, you know, acquired well through ancient wisdom and kind of recognizing the value in that. You know, there's a lot of good that comes with modern innovation, but there's also a lot of good that comes with looking back, right? Let's see, what else do you guys have to say? Oh, comment from Jared Jensen. Hey, Jared. Wow, good thing I don't plan to be in Oregon much longer. Yes, no kidding. I'm really curious what you meant by the water from the leak being chemically unique. Could you elaborate? Hi, back. Yes, I absolutely can elaborate. So here's the thing. If you go through the main paper that was published with all of these findings, essentially the #1 quality of the water that was like first off determined to be different from the surrounding, you know, so we talked about the differentiation between something like a hydrothermal vent versus a hot spring, right? A hydrothermal vent is effectively seawater that falls through a crack in Earth's crust, gets heated up in the mantle layer, by the mantle layer, right, underneath the lithosphere of the Earth, and then gets shot back up. But it's the same salt water. Whereas this, you can think of it more like an underground hot spring. So it's not actually salt water. This liquid, as part of Pythia's Oasis, is not actually part of the surrounding ocean. It's something totally separate from that. So chemically different is actually referring to mostly the salt quality, so the lack thereof in this, and also the fact that there was a temperature difference, which is to be expected from something coming up from the Earth in any capacity. So that's effectively what the paper described it, how the paper described it. So that's a great question. Thank you. Another question from, or another comment from Requiem. Thank you so much for joining us. I love to see friendly faces in the chat. It's seriously great. I mention it often when I reply individually to you all, but it's a pleasure to read your thoughts, and you inspire me quite a lot. So many of the topics that I've wanted to cover came directly from thoughts that you guys have shared, so thank you for that. Okay, we'll read one more. Over time, as threats seem to dissipate, people forget how to deal with them and become caught off guard. I wonder how many civilizations were destroyed naturally that we may never know about. Yeah, you know, this is a great place to end on. I couldn't agree more with you. I think there is a huge shift going on in the modern world right now. I don't want to go too off topic with this, but obviously we're seeing the rise of AI, we're seeing the rise of a lot of change. We're in actual potential real discussions about, you know, computers being able to replace human thinking and human, you know, activity in a lot of ways, as far as what our daily lives look like. You know, the possibility that people may not work anymore, right? That, according to some people in the modern tech realm, is something that we are actively pushing towards. To me, this is kind of scary. As someone who has been doing deep dive research into AI for maybe half a year now, right? So I'm nowhere close to an expert, but I've read enough to be aware of what's going on to at least my extent. That is not something we should be pushing towards doing. Losing the wisdom that comes with ancient tradition and the skill sets that get passed down generation to generation, it kind of makes me think of the whole, you know, last name trend, right? So this is mainly centric to European ancestry, but last names like Baker or Smith, they come from actual professions, meaning a family full of smiths, metalworkers, right, would then pass down not only the name through history, but the skill set through history. And that is part of why we have been able to hold on, and culturally, we've been able to hold on to these skills. And now we're at a point now where there are people in the world that are actively pushing against that. And I also agree with you, that is dangerous. I think we should be embracing the new abilities of technology as tools, but we shouldn't allow them to go too far, right? That's just my take. You can tell me some more in the comments what you think about that. Let's see. Okay, we'll read one more comment. Have you seen where the ocean meets and is separated by just different densities rather than each other so they don't mix? Okay, I actually have an episode planned on this, so that one is coming down the pipeline. I'm not going to touch on it too much yet. I don't want to give you guys any spoilers, but yes, I am fully aware of that, and I'm really looking forward to doing a deep dive on it, so stay tuned for that. And on that note, I think that's where we're going to end off today. So seriously, thank you all so much for joining me. This has been another episode of the Codex Legendarium. Please take a minute to like, share, subscribe. Tell your friends who are into this kind of thing, who are, you know, fascinated with the mysteries of the universe as we all are. Tell them about it. It really helps get the word out for our show. So seriously, thank you so much. I'm Shelby Melanson, and thank you for joining me.